The first time I heard the lyrics upon discovering the song, my interpretation was that the plot centered around a guilt for the way a past relationship had ended, and a regret for prolonging the inevitable. That was until I happened upon the music video made possible by Autoheart. The music video, which in my opinion has been adapted phenomenally, changes a lot of the context of the song, and for me it changed the meaning entirely. The first opening shots introduce the house and our protagonist, who is first shown lying in their bed covered in lipstick stains. At first establishing the relationship between them and the lipstick wearer as one that is sexual and somewhat aggressive, as in the next shot the figure, as we'll call her, is shown strangling the protagonist. A deeper connection between the characters is alluded to in the visuals shown where it looks like they have the same hair. Yes, this hair bit becomes important later. Right off the bat, in the first verse, the lyrics are sang, with the visual accompanying it being the aforementioned strangling scene. I think the protagonist's relationship with the figure shows us more that they feel that the figure has more power over them, and with the lyrics it expresses a sort of envy they feel for the figure's body and form. It's worth mentioning that gender dysphoria is something when someone feels a detachment between themselves and their assigned sex at birth. From my experience and accounts from friends who are also trans, a common trigger is an awareness of the way others perceive us. The NHS describes gender dysphoria is a term that describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. The sense of unease or dissatisfaction may be so intense it can lead to depression and anxiety and have a harmful impact on daily life. This scene where the figure is literally strangling him in this context could be interpreted as them being the same person, and this is an expression of the protagonist's own self-harm. A protagonist may feel that they are being suffocated by this figure that looms in their life, and thus they villainize the figure and deem her presence an issue. One of the repeated visuals in the music video is the rabbit form that appears and is referenced throughout the video. Something of note about the artist Hellbent is that they have been the artist behind multiple Autoheart projects. They first caught the band's attention through a fan animation made on Flipnote 3D. A bit of a tangent, but Flipnote animators will always amaze me because I've seen some incredible mastery of the limited system. I was pretty young when I began Flipnote animating, and regrettably I never really got to the mastery level others could because I found it frustratingly difficult, so I dropped it pretty early. But Flipnote looked like this, so you can't really blame me. Hellbent would then go on to become the artist for the Hellbent album cover, the Hellbent music video, single release art, and then the Spotify canvas animations. These animations are significant because they connect the songs in the Hellbent album via the repeated characters. Therefore, it's not much of a leap for me to say that there is a connection between the rabbit figure in the video and the song Rabbit in Headlights, which has the protagonist in the Spotify canvas animation. The first shot where we see the rabbit appear is one where the visual switches between the figure and the protagonist both transforming into the rabbit. A rabbit in a headlight, which, more familiar to me as a deer in headlights, is someone who is so nervous that they cannot move or speak. This may mean then that the rabbit itself is a reference to the protagonist's paralysis, which we saw in the beginning of the video. A set of lyrics that is repeated multiple times in Rabbit in a Headlight are, "I don't feel ready myself." I think in this context we can interpret that the reference is an expression of the protagonist finding a dissatisfaction in how they live their life, i.e. gender expression. Hellbent has a notoriously vibrant art style, and this plays a role in the video. Its colors are used very liberally to describe and represent the characters. So, the protagonist has red eyes and wears a blue shirt. Meanwhile, the figure has blue eyes and wears a red dress. This definitely doesn't get confusing later. The silhouette of the protagonist, identifiable by the red eyes, is shown split by the limb into blues, reds, and purples with a blue heart. I think the inconsistency may allude to the protagonist feeling as though some parts of themselves are better represented by the figure, but not all of them. Enter she, a version of the protagonist and the figure who seems to be a mix of both, sharing an eye from each of them. In her first appearance, she's what I describe as a literal interpretation of how I described her earlier, in that she's both the protagonist and the figure, just split down the middle, thus making her identifying characteristics being her heterochromia and having a combination of the protagonist's short hair on one side and the figure's long hair on the other. See, I told you the hair would be relevant again. Hair on its own is a common way for people to express themselves, and for trans individuals, it's often a means of gender expression and can bring a great deal of gender euphoria just by being cut or grown. I think then that her appearance is a sort of true or desired form of the protagonist, which they also somewhat reject. In the next scene, we hear the words, "blue, black, magic." The protagonist is shown sitting across the figure at the table that sits their drinks, a wine glass for her and a rocks glass for the protagonist. Yes, I learned what a rocks class is for this. According to Wikipedia, black magic is, quote, the use of supernatural powers or magic for evil and selfish purposes. Specifically, the 7 magical arts prohibited by canon law. What is canon law, you ask? Canon law is essentially a set of ordinances and regulations made by an authority, which is usually church leadership. Why is this important? Well, it's repeated in the lyrics. And in the video, we even get a shot toward the end of the song in which the protagonist is seemingly yelling this line to himself. Now, bear with me. While the term hellbent usually refers to expressing a reckless sort of determination, I think the song within the context of the music video means it as the term hellbound, which is usually used when referring to someone who is damned to hell. I think then that the protagonist is scared of the thoughts and feelings that they're having, thus projecting the sides of themselves which they see as demonic and therefore hellbent. In my experience as a genderqueer individual born in Catholicism, conformity was always shoved down our throats. I remember my church school teacher's way of telling me to stop addressing myself as anything other than a woman was her saying, quote, "My body does not belong to me." And it's an insult to say that my God made a mistake with his creation, which, a great message to send a 12-year-old. It's a common experience for queer youth to be scared into conformity via the threat of falling from God's grace, and I believe the protagonist has had a similar experience in their upbringing. If that wasn't enough, we also get a hint toward religious trauma when it comes to the protagonist looking at the moon. Where the protagonist looks to the moon and refers to it as, quote, the gods above. The moon in the video acts as a sort of god, as it is a constant that is always looming over the protagonist, seemingly watching and judging their every move. Going off of this, the visuals paired with the repetition of the word hellbent as the different identities of the protagonist are shown can be interpreted as the protagonist repressing their own selves because of an internalized transphobia of sorts brought upon them by their upbringing. It reads as though they are proclaiming that each and every version of themselves is bad, and their exclamation at the end, I think, shows their frustration with the hypocrisy that they are seeing from their god. The figure, as the most femme-presenting on the spectrum, is someone the main character fears becoming. She exists in their head as the idea of an expectation of an identity that the protagonist thinks they'll have to adopt if they were to commit to this transition in their life. In my journey, I ruled out being a man early because when I pictured that future, who I saw was a stranger. And he was a stranger because I didn't look at him as myself, but rather some idealized version of what could have been if I had just gotten my Y chromosome. I think then that the she who reaches out to the protagonist can be described as the one who convinces them to take the leap. She exists as an equilibrium in which the protagonist could feel the most themselves, and is also someone new who they can feel comfortable in the skin of. She and the protagonist find that as they look into each other's eyes, that they are one and the same.